Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today, I am delighted to welcome Nausheen Chen, an executive public speaking coach, and we're going to discuss the art of public speaking, but not only, we're also going to discuss becoming the best version of yourself and how Nausheen helps people to do that. So, Nausheen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Nausheen, you've lived in various places, France, Toulouse being the most recent. And I know you've traveled a lot also, but also on a personal journey to get to where you are today. And, you know, you've worked in Fortune 50 companies, you've worked hard to build your career, you got a prestigious scholarship to a film school in New York. You co-founded a filmmaking startup in China, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, everyone you knew was impressed, including yourself, yet still you felt that there was something missing. And you are now an executive public speaking coach. Something I assume often that CEOs and senior executives know how to do. You know, they know how to present, they know how to inspire, they know how to speak to hundreds of people at a time. But we'll come back to that. So can we start with you and how you got to where you are? That's quite an eclectic range of careers and quite a bold journey that you've been on. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. First of all, love that deep research. So thank you for taking me through that memory lane a bit.
Yeah.
I was one of those kids who would stand up in front of the entire family and recite the most boring poem ever. I used to be that annoying kid. So
Brilliant.
I've been in love with speaking on stages and speaking on camera from later on for most of my life, for as long as I can remember. But I never really pursued that as my living, as my primary job. So as you were talking about it, I took the long way around. I started off in the Fortune 50 world. And at that time, I thought, awesome, this is everyone's dream come true. Who doesn't want to work in a Fortune 50 straight out of college? And it was a wonderful experience. I learned so much that still informs my work ethic and the way I approach problems to this day, 17 years later. But as I was doing marketing and PR, I always had this feeling that that wasn't me. That's not ultimately what I want to do. I just didn't know what was it that I did want to do. So I had a lovely quarter life crisis and
Quarter life crisis, brilliant. Okay.
and got into all kinds of things like improv, stand-up comedy. I ended up co-producing and writing a crappy little segment on a late night show. And from there, just meandered into filmmaking. Ended up doing that full time as my very first entrepreneurial venture in China, of all places, like you said. And even during that time, I felt that the main draw for me, what was really fulfilling for me, was making sure that anyone who was on screen, whether it was an actor or a CEO who was speaking for the first time on camera, anyone on screen should be able to give their best performance, because that was my job as the director, to get the best performance out of them. And that's when I realized something weird. All these great leaders, CEOs and CMOs, would talk when they would talk to their teams, they would be fine. They would be able to inspire, they would bring out their personality. But as soon as you put them in front of a camera, they became these pale versions of themselves. They
It's
became
part of the pressure, though, isn't it? The pressure to look good, to sound good, to be good.
Yeah, they were under pressure. They couldn't figure out how to be at ease, to be themselves. They would also ramble, or they would forget what they had to say. So I started working with them and started coaching them alongside the filmmaking work, and realized that the coaching part, the part where I help them be their most natural, the most impactful selves on camera, that was the most fulfilling. So I took a cue from there and had another big change in my life and my career at the age of 38, 39, where I felt like I am now approaching my 40s and is the time to shoot all my shots. It's the time to have no regrets and do the things that
now or never.
Yeah, it really is. It really felt like it was now or never. So I quit filmmaking. I quit all my projects and just focused on how can I make a living out of this love for speaking and this love for coaching people to be their best when they're speaking in public? How can I turn that into a business? So a year and a half later, here I am, and now I do full-time public speaking coaching, and I help both entrepreneurs and execs speak with impact. So that's the meandering journey that I went through.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, how things come back to the start. So if I look at, your first anecdote about you being that boring kid who speaks about the boring poem and who always wants to get up and tell and speak the poem in front of everyone, do you think that that's what's led you to what you do today, is that you are so passionate about that, it's your happy place, that you automatically want to inspire people to go on that journey because you found it so inspiring?
It actually started off as a much more selfish endeavor, not as selfless as you beautifully make it out to be. But I could absolutely trace it to that. I was always an extrovert, but I was also the youngest child. So no one ever really paid attention to me. My
Okay.
opinions didn't matter for a long, long time. Well,
Okay.
till I was well into my 20s, it felt like no one really ever cared about my opinion or my story. My voice wasn't being heard.
Okay.
Also, as a woman growing up in a
Of course.
conservative country,
Mm-hmm.
you were not encouraged to have a loud voice or a loud opinion. You were not encouraged to be bold. You were encouraged to fit in, to be as diplomatic and quiet and pleasant as possible. All the things that I just never felt like, and that never came naturally to me to be quiet. So being on stage was the one place where no one could silence me, because all eyes were on me. And I finally felt like I was getting the attention that I knew I deserved. So it came from that place. But because I was exposing myself to all these situations of being in the limelight and having to speak and perform from that early age, I had literally almost zero stage fright. I'd never felt nervous. And so I learned all these things in a very acquisitionary way, almost like acquiring a primary language. And only later on did I realize that all these things that I had just learned the hard way, the long way, without even knowing I was learning them, were things that can help other people. And that's where it switched from being very selfish to more selfless and something that I can help people with.
Yeah. And what's the biggest learning, therefore, from your journey so far? Because I'm hearing that you want to help people do what you took the long way around to do and give your learning back so that they can then have impact in their world. So what's the biggest learning? What was the light bulb where you thought, okay, I am going to give my learning back to other people who in my arena who need it, i.e. people who need to be okay on a stage, good at public speaking, and feel that they can be themselves, even more important, as you said, on a stage, speaking to their people, whether it's a CEO or a senior executive or a CTO or a CDO, they need to be engaging their people in their environment, in their context, don't they? So what was your biggest learning on your journey where you thought, you know what, I need to give this back, which is what I'm hearing from your story?
At the heart of it is finding and speaking with your own voice. And it sounds so simple, but it's something that most people don't do.
Yes,
We're
particularly women, I think.
particularly women. Yeah. Also shy men,
Of course.
introverts, people that have been self-silencing, or people that have been silenced their whole lives. People that feel like their point of view may not matter. People that are too shy to actually express an opinion. And when they do express it, it comes out in this verbal diarrhea where sometimes you just ramble and say things because you're so nervous and you want to get it over with. So helping you find your true voice and then speak with your true voice, that's really at the heart of the work.
So how do you, because like you say, it sounds simple and it isn't, it's so complex, and everybody also has their internal stories that are feeding what we think about when we step on a stage, what we think about our voice, what we think about what we've got to say. How do you actually help people become the best versions of themselves? Because, it's one of my quests personally, but also to help the people I work with do that in an organizational context, but you can never dissociate work from personal in that type of subject. So how do you go about helping these CEOs find their voice and use it?
I work on 3 levels: the mindset, the message, and the delivery.
Okay.
And it really is in that order, because if you don't have the right mindset, if you're not tapping into that inner confidence, you're not doing justice to yourself or your message. It is entirely possible to fake confidence. And it's something that I never advise my clients to do, because I used to do that for the longest time. I worked on the performative aspect of it first. And then only later on in my 30s did I realize that you could put me on a stage anytime and I would project this confidence, but I wouldn't feel it inside. I would feel like I was a crumbling mess. I would feel like an imposter. So working on that mindset and creating what I call a virtuous cycle, where every time you approach a new speaking opportunity, you give yourself proof that you have the tools, you understand how to do it, you've done it before. And how you get that proof is by debriefing with yourself after every single time you speak, so that you're arming yourself with proof for the next time you have a negative voice pop up and say, I don't think you can do this. You can counter that by saying, well, not only have I done it before, but I also understand the right tools. And the tools piece is what the messaging and the delivery is all about, where I help you figure out what is the right way to take all these ideas, all this knowledge that you have about your subject, and filter it into understandable messages that are going to be heard, understood, and remembered. This is also the part where I work with founders on what is your origin story? What are the 5 key values that you stand for, that you always want all your messaging to come down to and be rooted in? And then working on the delivery, because you can have the best doc, you can have the best speech, the best presentation content-wise, but if you don't deliver it with impact, then you're robbing it of its true potential.
Absolutely.
If you're speaking in a monotone, if you're not pausing, if you're not checking in or engaging with the audience. So all of those form the delivery tools. So at the end, it's about the mindset, what your message is, and how you're delivering it.
And what takes the longest? I mean, it's sort of a loaded question, because I clearly have a bias on what I think takes the longest. but out of those 3 blocks, what takes the longest? Where do you spend the most time with your clients?
I've realized that it depends on the person. So
Interesting.
I get 2 different types of people, personality wise. There are your introverts who are not just introverts, but they're painfully shy. They just don't like being in the spotlight. That brings them stress. It makes their minds go blank. It makes them perform at a completely suboptimal level. And with someone like that, mindset is the work on that mindset takes much longer. And that's where I really get them out of their heads, where I get them to start improvising, start speaking, and start spending less time in their heads and more time actually getting their message out. That takes work. But then I also work with this totally different personality type, people that are very confident, very ambitious, very sure of themselves, but they've developed very specific patterns of speaking and presenting that are not optimized, that don't make the most impact. These are folks that might ramble a lot and then they bury the lead. They are folks that might go on stage and present their presentation without even engaging with the audience, without making it interesting or exciting for them. So with those folks, we don't work as much on the mindset piece, because they tell me, Nausheen, I'm not nervous at all. It's just that the results that I see are not the best. I know I can do better. So it's not about getting them from 0 to 1. It's about getting them from wherever they are at a 3 or a 4 all the way up to an 8 or a 9. And that's where we spend a lot of time on the message and the delivery.
And it's really interesting, because in your TED talk around confidence and action, and that cycle of which one comes first and how you feed the cycle, there's also discussions around fear. And I'd be really interested in your input and insight on, can fear and confidence coexist? Because I often hear, I'll know when I'm confident when I'm no longer scared. Or I'll feel confident when I don't get that little feeling in my stomach before I step on the stage. And I think people have this black or white understanding of, if I'm confident, I won't be scared. But what are your thoughts on that?
They can absolutely exist, and they do. The key is to not let your fear or your nerves get in the way of your performance and action. And that's where I see the difference. There are people that feel scared and they let that fear stop them from taking action, where they keep looking for the next qualification they can get, the next training, the next book they can read, and then they keep thinking about it forever and they don't take action. They never start that podcast. They never go on camera and do that course that they know they want to do. And then there are people that feel scared and they do it scared. They do the scary thing. And then it's not just, based on my research, I realize it's not just taking that action that results in confidence. It's actually creating that virtuous cycle deliberately, intentionally. So after you do the scary thing, how do you talk to yourself about it? How do you use that proof to feed the next scary thing? That's where that key difference lies. There's this experiment that Albert Bandura, who's a great psychologist, he did, and you would have come across it in the talk. I can recap that really quickly here.
Yeah, it would be great.
It's very relevant.
Yeah.
So there are two people that are playing a game. You have confident Kathy and insecure Ian. And Albert Bandura looked at two different scenarios, one where they're both winning, one where they're both losing, to see how do confident people talk to themselves, either when they're winning or when they're losing, and how does that impact their future actions. So confident Kathy, when she starts losing, she says, that's okay, I'm going to try better next time. The problem is that I didn't try hard enough and it's in my power, I can change it. Insecure Ian, when he starts losing, he tells himself, the problem is me, I'm awful at this, I'm a failure, I can't do it. So he takes every failure and uses that to destroy his self-confidence even more. But what about the scenario where they're winning? So when confident Kathy is winning, she tells herself, yeah, I did that. That was me. She takes full credit, full accountability. And that helps her do better next time and feel more excited next time, because she feels this sense of agency and autonomy. When you take credit for your wins, you feel that sense of control, because you know that it was my hard work that led me there. Therefore, my hard work can get me to other places. Insecure Ian, even when he's winning, doesn't let that win positively affect his confidence. He says, it was just luck. I can't count on it. It removes his own agency from the results that he's getting. And so he could win 5 times and he would still not feel confident that 6th time going in. And that's the key difference, not just taking action, but taking action and intentionally developing that positive self-talk that will then propel your next action forward into success.
I mean, I always feel that if it doesn't feel scary, it's not big enough. That's my motto. You know, if you're stepping into something, like when I stepped out of corporate, and it felt huge and scary and big, and it was all of those things, but it was immense amounts of growth, and it was brilliant. But it was also around the way I spoke to myself, of course, and this reframe that you're talking around, how you can use what fear brings in a more creative, sort of positive sense. But and we're coming back to failure as well, which I would really like your take on, because telling yourself that you're failing all the time is one negative self-talk. But I think failure in organizations and the way that can make leaders feel and be perceived is really important, particularly for this subject, where they have to get up in front of their people, whether they feel that they failed or not, because that's what they need to do to communicate. What's your take on failure? If I look at your journey, which is eclectic, bold, and pretty diverse, you can't have got there without some type of failure as can nobody, because that's how we learn, or that's my view on failure. What's your biggest failure moment, Nausheen, and how did you reframe to get to the next step?
Oh gosh. So I was a filmmaker at this time, and we had taken on one of our big projects to date, pretty much the biggest one. It was a multi-day shoot, and I had brought together a team of about 25 people for creating this corporate documentary. And one of the things I always prided myself on doing was involving the client at every stage so that A, they felt that they were giving input, and B, that we would always have visibility throughout the process so that at the end, it doesn't come as a surprise, whatever we create for them. This is something that is difficult for a lot of corporate clients to understand, that unlike a written ad or a graphic that can be photoshopped, there actually is a lot less flexibility with video. You can't just Photoshop things in and out without big amounts of budget going into animation and CGI and After Effects. You can't make someone look completely different. So one of my big fears was always that I wanted to make sure the client felt involved. So I did that in this project. I had the client weigh in on everything from the concept and idea to the storyboards to the first draft. When we shot everything and we showed it to the client after the first cut, they went silent, which was very alarming. So I didn't hear back from them for a week. And then when they came back, they said, wow, this is completely not what we expected. We don't even know how to give you feedback. We feel like this project is just a failure at this point. Let's just stop the work right away. So we never finished the project. And that was a huge failure. That was my first failure as a filmmaker. And it was a big shock because I felt like I did everything right. There shouldn't have been that big element of shock at the end. They should have known what to expect. Turns out that while I was following the process on paper, the client kept saying these things that were red flags that I just didn't listen to. They were saying things like, yeah, it's good. Yeah, we trust you. Yeah, you're the expert. Yeah, we know you'll give us something we like. I looked back at the weeks of communication with them and realized they had never actually given any input. We would show them something and they would say, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, we just want to see what you'll do. What that meant was that they had never actually took the time to go into the details of anything. They just had this blind trust, which is a huge red flag, where people expected us as a filming team to just come in and turn a key and give them the best video, which can never really happen. So that was a big lesson for me, that I felt like I was communicating well, but it was not. It was a complete communication failure. And from that point onwards, anytime I got approvals that were too easy, anytime that I felt like the client felt like they were listening to me, but they weren't actually listening, then I realized it was my job as the lead on the project to dig deeper, to ask more questions, to really get them to reconsider and to dig deep into what it is that they're saying, go beyond the surface, to listen to what hasn't been said. That's one of the key skills that I developed after that initial shock of the moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that the blind trust, which can feel so flattering, is actually a red flag, because it means we're not going to have a discussion. You won't ever get to ask me what I actually want and to formulate my definition of good of that project. And I can let you do the whole thing and you can give it to me and I can say, oh, I don't like it. It's very interesting because that's, when we're flattered, we think, okay, they want my expertise, so I'm just going to do what I want. So really interesting. So how has that informed what you do today? The process by which you work, the way you work with your clients. How have you used your learning from that? Because there's multiple learnings, although the major one is you didn't communicate what you thought you were communicating. How do you use that, therefore, to build what you do now with public speaking coaching?
I've had to work on becoming a better listener. And this is something that I've realized a lot of extroverts struggle with from time to time. people that like speaking may not always be the best listeners,
Mm.
but I've made it part of my job to not just be the best speaker, the best coach, but also the best listener. So I had to really work on that and go deep into it. One of my coaches taught me about at least five different levels of active
Yes.
listening,
Mm-hmm.
where it goes all the way from you ignoring someone to there's a middle section where a lot of people get stuck, where they are listening, but they are not listening from the point of view of the person. They're still imposing their own thoughts and worldview and opinions on the data that they hear. A lot of people think that's active listening, but it's not. The highest level of empathetic active listening is when you're just receiving information. When someone's talking, you're not waiting for your turn to speak. You're not thinking of what you're going to say. You are 110% in the moment and receiving the data from this person without your own judgment clouding or coloring the data that you're receiving. So I always strive to hit that level. Hopefully I do, but that's what I had to really educate myself on.
Yeah, so you had to build practice again. It's like going to the gym, isn't it? You have to really practice growing that muscle, if you like. And if I look at your current business, so you've set up a successful business in a very short space of time. I have two questions. One, did you expect it to take off like that, Nausheen? And two, what's your vision for the next 5 years of where your business is going to go, where you're going to go?
So no, I absolutely did not expect it. I didn't know what to expect. It was my second time being an entrepreneur, but my first time building anything digitally, because my last business was very much offline and had to do with going out, finding local resources, locations, actors, and clients as well. And this was the first time that I was building something completely online, completely digital. And I started with just building my brand on LinkedIn. That was the first step because I wanted to get the word out there. And I know, because I come from a marketing background, I understand how important it is to have an audience, to have people that listen to your actual message. And of course, then have a message that's worth listening to. So I only worked on those two things at the beginning. All of the first year was just experimentation and figuring out what are the different things that I can do. I had no idea what mailing lists were about or what podcasts were about. I didn't know what lead magnets were, what a sales funnel was, just all these things that were completely alien to me. And I had to teach myself some of it, get coaching on some of it, get training on some of it. So where it started changing was when I realized that the things I was saying and the way that I was saying them was getting some traction. So I always kept looking at the analytics and doubled down on what was working. At the time, it was videos where I would create these short videos with these speaking tips, and people started really liking them because they just weren't seeing something like that on LinkedIn. And that's where I got the attention of LinkedIn themselves, where they asked me to be an official LinkedIn learning instructor. And I got a lot of invites from different companies like Twitch. I ended up speaking at Google, at Amazon. And that's where I started people asking me how they can work with me. So there are many ways of shaping a public speaking business. There are those that just focus on being trainers and speakers. And then there are those that focus more on being coaches. So at that point, I had to decide which direction to go in. And I do a lot of workshops and speaking, but a lot of the focus that I have is now on coaching and on helping others speak better. So that was the decision that I took at that point. And the 5-year plan is to get more scalability without having to work 20-hour days or 18-hour days, which I do sometimes. So absolutely, there are 3 big goals that I have for the next 5 years. One of them involves getting a PhD. That's always been the dream. Who doesn't want
Where
to
are
be
you going
Dr.
to do
Chen?
that? Where are you going to do that?
Where?
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet. I've looked around here in France. I'm also looking at places in the Netherlands. What I want to figure out first is also what I want the PhD in. It has to be, of course, connected to speaking and to communication, but what is it that I can actually dive deep into? So
Okay.
that's one of the plans. Second
Excellent.
one is to publish a book, and I'm already working on that. And the third one is to create a course that can really help scale the business and scale my learnings. And that's something that I'm figuring out as we go along. I don't have all the answers, because what I see from my work is that people always need that human element. They
Of course.
need someone to guide them, to give feedback to them, to help them see what they're not seeing. So I'm not really sure right now, how can I distill everything I know into a course that's actually going to help people without me being there? That's a question that I'm investigating, and I have to answer that for myself.
Excellent. Wow, PhD. Well, you can let me know what you actually decide to do your PhD in. I'd be very interested. And if I come back to the beginning of the introduction of, when you were saying when you're in the Fortune 50 companies and your next bold move for the scholarship into film school in New York, you were like, everybody was impressed with you and you were impressed with you, but there was still something missing. I'm hearing now that that something missing has been filled in, and that you're impressed with yourself, other people are impressed with you, and that is actually, and I'm going to use the word, it's quite a strong word, is your vocation. That's what you want to do. Is that correct?
Yeah. In so many ways, it feels like I did find my calling, because it is the one thing unquestionably that I went back to over 17 years of my professional life. Speaking in public, speaking on stages, speaking on camera was the one constant throughout. And so it finally feels like something that I'm not just qualified to do, but that I actually also enjoy and that the world needs. So doing that ikigai exercise seems to definitely tick off the boxes.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because when people say, I don't know what to do, I don't like career intersections, or I'm not quite sure what I want to do, my advice is always to go back and look at very early life in terms of your values. And you will often find that that thread running through is actually applicable to what you want to do. And if I go back to your very first anecdote, that's exactly what you want, even though today it's framed very differently because you've been on a journey, but that's what you're good at, that's what you like doing, and that's what you want to help other people to do. So it's really interesting to see how your journey's built itself, if you like. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But my question, I suppose, from that is, what would you like our listeners to know that you wish, Nausheen, that you had known earlier?
It's never too early to start telling your story. So I had wanted to build my brand on LinkedIn for years. I was thinking about it for about 5 years, and I kept stopping myself, silencing myself, censoring myself, because I felt like, who's going to want to hear what I have to say? My opinions aren't that of an expert. I'm not as qualified to speak about this as other people who have been working in this field for ages. And what should I even talk about? Because the 5 years preceding me starting the business, I wasn't sure of my focus. But none of that matters. What matters is that you start getting your voice out there, because once you can build a brand that people are attracted to, you are future-proofing your career. You are gaining traction for any kind of an endeavor. It doesn't even need to be a business endeavor. If tomorrow you want to do a passion project, you have a built-in audience that could be a part of that. So that is the biggest service you can do to yourself and your career, by being more public, being more vocal, and understanding how the world of branding works, in the sense of creating your own little niche and attracting people to it.
You have to step over your fear again, though, don't you? I mean, there is a certain amount of fear in, okay, I'm just going to put my voice out there and see what people think. I mean, I know it's never as simple as that, but, stepping into your own space, whether it's podcasting or your own business or things like that, I think are quite scary, especially if you have stories from your childhood or just from the stories you tell yourself that you're too shy, or that you're not good at speaking on a stage, or that people won't listen to you. I mean, I used to go red every time I spoke in school, every single time. And you build this up, and I had to sort of dissociate from that and think, no, actually, I'm good at this. I quite like this, and I've got something to say. But that's quite a long process, isn't it, in terms of listening to yourself and stepping over your fear. So, I mean, what is the most transformative thing that you, Nausheen, have ever done. Because you've done a lot of change, a lot of growth, a lot of bold moves, all of them successful. Doesn't mean you haven't failed, but all of them highly successful. So what's the most transformative part of that for you?
My late quarter life crisis. That was the first time that I broke away from the path that I was walking on, the path that I felt was the best path, because everyone around me had told me, yeah, getting a great 9 to 5 job, being married to someone who was very reliable, and really living the best life was that's what was happening in my early 20s. I was making more money than people I knew, and I was set on this path where I could see the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of me. Breaking away from that was the hardest and the most transformative thing, because the moment I broke away, I felt this great sense of freedom and autonomy. Like I could choose again. I could figure out and shape my own life. I don't need to depend on someone else's definition of success. I can create my own. And that has been absolutely transformative, because now, like I was telling you earlier, 10 years after that, I had another change, and I this time broke away from another identity that I had created, but it was definitely easier because I had done it once before. I had this conviction that I am resilient. I'm going to be able to reinvent myself. That very first time, I had no idea what was going to happen. I just took that jump.
Yeah, and your body, your mind, and your emotions have, and muscles have that memory, don't they? So I suppose it's starting to become familiar in terms of ways of doing things. But time is running. But just before we go, what would your final call to action be, or recommendation for our listeners around getting your voice heard and stepping into a space that is essentially the space where you can be your best self?
Figure out what you want to stand for and aim to intentionally look for opportunities to get your message out. That can be on your own platform, like we were talking about personal branding. It can be on borrowed platforms, like being a guest on amazing podcasts like this. It can be doing new things with finding your voice, like creating a new course, doing a webinar, doing a masterclass, doing a live event. Anytime that you found a message that you know is worth spreading, and you're working on delivering it in the best way, in the most intentional and impactful way, anytime you do those two things, you will absolutely see that there is success just waiting for you. And there's this great quote that I always like revisiting. Once you've made up your mind to do something, the entire world conspires to make it happen. And I truly believe that if you can get that first piece of conviction that I absolutely need to start creating videos, I absolutely need to get my messaging out, I need to be visible, because you deserve credit for the work that you're doing. And staying invisible isn't going to get you that credit or that credibility or visibility or authority. So the moment you have that conviction, you will see doors opening for you. You just have to walk through them and take advantage of them.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that. Be big, think big, do big. Okay, excellent. Nausheen, thank you so much for coming and openly sharing your stories, your experiences, your journey. Where can people find out more about you and what you do and public speaking?
Speaking.coach, that's my website, hopefully very easy to remember. And that's where you'll find lots of free resources, lots of videos and articles and guides. And you can also get in touch with me on that website. So speaking.coach. And if you're active on LinkedIn, I am the only Nausheen Chen on LinkedIn. So find me there, send me a friend request, and we can talk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Susie. This was great.